Being alone at night makes you quite vulnerable, so let's find out, and let the darkness take control. I wasn't exactly the most popular kid in high school. I was just this average girl, not cool enough to hang out with the popular crowd, but not quirky enough to get bullied either. Honestly, if you ask most of my classmates today, they probably wouldn't even remember me. I grew up in a big city. I won't say where, but think of somewhere like Detroit or Philadelphia. I grew up in a place like that. My neighborhood was this mix of faded brick buildings and concrete jungle. There was always noise, honking horns, sirens, and things like that. It had its own kind of charm, but sometimes it felt a bit heavy, and there was definitely a lot of crime. That wasn't super popular. My claim to fame, though, was that my dad owned a junkyard with an iron shredder. It might sound a bit odd, but honestly, it was kind of fascinating. A few people wanted to come by and watch the machine shred old washing machines, rusty bikes, and the like. The first time I saw it in action, I was about 10, and the noise was like thunder. I remember feeling scared watching how the metal twisted and crumpled. It was oddly beautiful in this destructive way. Now all the girls in school were crushing on this guy called Marco, and of course I was too. He was a basketball star who worked out all the time, plus he always seemed super smart, like he had stocks figured out or something. Everyone knew he had some family problems, but he still radiated confidence. One night during a football game, he came over to talk to me. My heart literally raced. I'd half expected someone to pinch me to wake me up from this dream. He didn't say much though. He just said he wanted to talk to me and asked if he could find me at halftime. I said we could meet at the front entrance. At halftime, we slipped away into his car. He said he wanted to go to McDonald's. That felt so random, but I didn't complain. This was my first chance to hang out with Marco, and it was starting to feel like a date. While we were driving, he suddenly pulled over and asked if he could show me something. He took out a gun. My heart dropped into my stomach. I was not ready to see that. He told me he needed to get rid of it, and everything around me went blurry. When someone holds a gun in front of you, all rational thought vanishes. I was terrified. I didn't want to be in that situation. I couldn't really say no because he was holding a gun. My mind raced with all the things that could go wrong. It felt like the weight of the world rested on my shoulders. I didn't ask questions, I just nodded, hoping to make things better. He told me to text him later saying, "It was nice seeing you at the game today," after I had got rid of it. We went through the McDonald's drive-thru, but I didn't have an appetite. That's seriously weird. It almost felt like I was being kidnapped. In a way, I kind of was. He didn't force me to get into the car with him, but I couldn't really tell him to let me go either. In a way, it felt like I was intimidated into being in his car. He gave me the gun and dropped me off at my car in the school parking lot, and we said goodbye from there. I went home and grabbed the keys to the junkyard, praying my parents wouldn't catch me. Thankfully, they were upstairs. The keys were on the fridge, and it felt like I was living in some sort of bad movie. I drove to the junkyard, but then the panic set in hard. What if opening the gate was too loud and someone heard me? What if an alarm went off? What if someone showed up while I was there? What if the gun got stuck in the shredder? I had never operated that thing alone. What if I accidentally hurt myself? What if I couldn't figure out how to operate the shredder in time? What if this whole plan backfired and made everything worse? I knew this wasn't going to work out. So instead I went back to McDonald's, ordered a large meal because fries make everything better, and carefully slipped the gun into a bag with the fries and burger. I looked on Google Maps and found a park about half-hour away and drove there trying to stay calm. When I got to the park, I felt strangely detached from everything around me. I tossed the McDonald's bag in the trash can and sat on a bench with my heart racing while trying to think of what to say if someone asked what I was doing. If anyone had approached me that night and asked if I was okay, I literally would have felt sick. I have no idea how long I spent trying to calm down, but eventually I was ready to go home. It wasn't until later I found out Marco's sister had gotten mixed up in something truly horrific that night. She was involved in a violent robbery where she had used a gun to threaten a store owner. The store owner had not cooperated with her, and she had beaten the man's head with the gun, leaving him bloodied and dazed on the floor. Thankfully, no one was killed, but the brutality of it felt all too terrifying and sad. The victim was an old man, and I was caught up in something way darker than I'd ever imagined. When Marco's sister was arrested and charged, I was terrified someone would find out what I had done and link it back to me. I felt like I was carrying around this heavy secret and that I was suffocating. The thought of being questioned by the police, or worse, becoming a suspect haunted me. I never brought up the incident. I saw Marco around school and made sure not even to make eye contact. Thankfully, I never heard anything more about it. The rumors faded and life went on. When girls talked about Marco, I said just enough to pretend like everything was normal. I still visit home occasionally and have seen Marco around. He's always surrounded by friends, laughing, carefree, but we never talk. It's terrifying how easy I was intimidated into participating into something so horrific. Each time I see him, it leaves me with a chill. And every time I do, I always hope it's the last time. This happened 2 summers ago, while I was house sitting out in California for an older couple I had met at a conference for work. It seemed like a dream scenario. The couple wanted to vacation in Hawaii for 2 weeks, but didn't want to board their cats, and I had been chatting with them about wanting to visit California again where they happened to live, because I had loved it the first time I went, and we figured that we could mutually benefit if I came out and house sat for them. So I flew out there, and they showed me around for a few days, taught me how to care for the cats, 2 of them, one was extremely shy and I barely saw, which is important later, and their plants, gave me access to their house and cars. These people were so generous, and before I knew it, I had dropped them off at the airport and was on my own. At first, it really was the dream vacation. I was staying in Oakland and making forays to San Fran, Panama, Monterey. In the mornings, I could walk out the front door and shortly be hiking the path surrounding nearby Mount Diablo, and I was ultra content with the world. I was so enamored by the area that I had actually started looking into taking some steps to relocate out there. But then one day, about halfway through my final week, when I got back to the house, I felt really odd, almost like I shouldn't go inside. I shook it off and went inside anyway, because it was getting late and I needed to put out dinner for the cats. Once I was inside, I forced myself to ignore how off I felt and made myself some food, went to bed, and was shocked to find this shy cat hiding under my bed crying. This was the first time I had seen her close up. The entire time I had been there up to that point, she never left my host's bedroom unless she didn't realize I was around. Again, I ignored feeling weird and just assumed she had decided I was okay and went to bed. I did start locking my bedroom door that night though. I also remember that about halfway through the night, I thought I heard someone walking around in the gravel outside the window. But after listening for a bit, I didn't hear anything else and went back to sleep. The day after in the morning, I still felt a little odd, but kept up with my plans for the day. I drove out to a little music festival in Sonoma and went clothes shopping and had an overall great day. When I got back to the house though, I found the front door locked in a way I hadn't left it. Basically, my host never locked the deadbolt, only the lower, second lock, and that's the only lock my key worked on, so I never messed with the deadbolt, but it was definitely locked. I had to call my hosts and find the hider key, which to their credit, safety-wise, was buried like a whole foot underneath a bush outside and had definitely not been unearthed for a long time. So I used that, went inside and kept the key with me just in case it happened again. And it did, but with a different door. This time I had stepped out into the garage to get a drink, and when I turned around to go back into the house, the door was shut and locked. I could use my normal key on that door, but I was still quite bewildered. My own cats are whack, so I think in my mind I was trying to come up with a way the cats could be locking me out of the house, but I was coming up empty. I decided I must have misunderstood how the locks worked, and just wrote it off and started checking and triple-checking locks when I went out of the house or into the garage. That night when I went to bed, the really awful feeling of unease was still there, and so was the shy cat, who was clearly unhappy to see me but also wouldn't leave my room. But again, I just locked my bedroom door and went to sleep. The next morning I felt awful, nausea, body ache, and I had no desire to leave the house, so I decided to stay in and Netflix for a day. This vacation stay was like a full 2 weeks, so I didn't feel the need or any hurry to get all my touristy things in anyway. But as the day went on, I started to feel that sense of wrongness again, and it morphed into feeling incredibly watched. Around mid-afternoon, it got to the point that I was so uneasy that even feeling awful, I decided to get out of the house for a bit to shake it off. I was getting a bit low on food, so I went to the grocery store and bought a few food items that I didn't think would hurt my stomach. As I started to leave the checkout, the cashier said the generic, "Have a great evening," and I instantly started crying, shocking myself and the poor cashier because I had this intrusive thought that said, "You might be the last person to ever say that to me." When I got into my car, I was still crying. My entire body was telling me not to drive back to the house. I could not, though, because I didn't want to neglect the cats, so I drove back, parked in the driveway, and convinced myself about half an hour to just go open the front door. Once I did that, I thought I would get it over with and would be able to go in and at least feed the cats, and then maybe I'd go get a hotel room after. But my body physically wouldn't let me inside. It was like I was stuck in the entryway. Then I made a deal with myself. I would yell into the house saying I'd already called the police and they were on their way. In panic logic, I figured that would make anyone in the house leave, so I faced the inside of the house looking down the hallway towards the bedroom, and I did just that. The second I had finished saying, "They're almost here, so if you want to avoid being arrested, you need to leave now," the light in my host's room turned on and I heard some banging. I immediately hightailed it back to the car, called the police for real, and proceeded to have a mental breakdown while talking to the dispatcher. Once they got there, they checked the house but didn't find anyone. But the double doors in my host's bedroom were left wide open. I'm so glad the cats didn't get out, and there was a pile of food wrappers in the corner behind the pillar, so they said it looked like someone had been there. What makes it scary is that nothing was taken, and based on the shape of the house, it would have been the perfect vantage point to see me in the living room as I stayed home sick. The house was in an L shape, and from the windows into the garden that were my host's bedroom, you could see me in the living room from the windows. The minute the police were gone, they said they couldn't prove anyone was there. There were no signs of forced entry, and they couldn't get a hold of my hosts immediately to verify if anything had been taken, which, once they were back, they verified nothing had. So they said they'd patrol a bit but nothing else. The shy cat was right back in my host's bedroom, and I didn't see her again until I left to go back home. I think the intruder had been there at least 2 days, forcing her to choose between two strangers and lead her to choose the one that was the least strange. Me. It messed me up pretty bad, especially because they didn't catch the person and didn't seem to have a desire to search for them. I still had to stay in the house for the next 3 days, but nothing else odd happened, and I didn't feel anything off for the rest of my time there. But the damage was done. I never felt completely safe in a home without doing a complete search before bed since. But I am extremely glad my gut spoke up. I guess I'd rather have some residual anxiety than be dead. I'm a 29-year-old male. At the time this story took place, I was 21. I had just moved to a new state and was enjoying the downtown nightlife. The city was alive. Bright lights, drunken laughter spilling from bars, and the distant honk of car horns, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. I was walking back to my apartment with my friend Gary, a bit buzzed but still aware of our surroundings. Our city is a massive metropolitan area, riddled with alleyways and dimly lit side streets that spiderweb through the urban jungle. It was late, past 2 a.m., when the streets got quieter and the air grew thick with an eerie stillness. We were alone, passing by a towering parking garage, its skeletal structure looming over us, when we both heard it, a sharp, sickening thud, followed by the unmistakable splash of liquid hitting pavement. It was that specific sound that sent a chill down my spine. Gary and I exchanged looks, but we shrugged it off. Perhaps water had dripped from the rooftop of the 50-story building. Maybe it was a garbage bag tossed from above. We kept walking. Then, as we neared a narrow alley to our left, something made both of us turn our heads. There, sprawled on the ground like a grotesque marionette with its strings cut, was a man. For a split second, our brains refused to process it. The way his limbs jutted out at unnatural angles, the way his body lay in a widening pool of dark liquid. It was surreal. Then horror sank in. He had jumped, or he had been pushed. Gary and I hesitated, our breaths coming in short gasps. But then impossibly, the man moved. A wet gurgling sound escaped his lips as he struggled to push himself up. His shattered bones jutted through his skin, gleaming white in the dim light. One of his legs bent the wrong way beneath him, and half his face, dear God, was gone, caved inwards, as if his skull had exploded on impact. And yet, he was still trying to stand. I felt bile rise in my throat. Gary was already reaching for his phone to call 911 when a deep, commanding voice cut through the alley like a knife. "Hey!" Our heads snapped up. At the far end of an alley, a man stood, tall, imposing, and all dressed in black. Our eyes met, and then he charged. No warning, just full speed sprinting towards us. We didn't need to speak. We legged it. Adrenaline hit me like a bullet, sobering me up instantly. Our footsteps pounded against the pavement, our ragged breath filling the empty streets as we tore through the city, not daring to look back. Gary fumbled with his phone, trying to dial the police, while I focused on putting as much distance between us and that alley as possible. 2 blocks later, lungs burning, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The man wasn't following us anymore, but he stood at the entrance of the alley watching. And then 2 more figures stepped out of the shadows beside him, dressed identically. They flanked him like sentinels, but they didn't chase us. They didn't shout. They just stood there staring, before all 3 of them turned and disappeared back into the darkness. We didn't stop running until we reached Gary's apartment. We locked the door, bolted the windows, and sat there in silence trying to make sense of what had just happened. The next day we searched the news. For anything, a police report, a body found in an alley, a man who had fallen or jumped from a parking garage. But there was nothing, not a single mention, no reports, no eyewitness accounts, as if it had never happened at all. To this day, Gary and I still wonder, did those men push that guy? Or did he jump in a desperate attempt to escape them? And if they had caught up to us, what would they have done? Would we have simply disappeared too, for being witnesses to this crime? I still get chills thinking about it. This happened shortly before weed was legalized in Germany. In Berlin, regulations were already quite loose. As long as you didn't explicitly bother anyone, you usually wouldn't get arrested for smoking in public. I've been smoking daily for years. I know it's not great, but that's besides the point. So I can function pretty well while stoned. However, I almost never smoke in public to avoid trouble, and mostly because I enjoy the comfort of my own home. One night at around 3 a.m., I was chilling online with friends, ready to call it a day. I wanted to relax with a joint and one of my favorite shows, but unfortunately I had no snacks left. Determined to end the night with a proper munchies session, I decided to hit up a nearby Spadi, a small convenience store similar to a 7-Eleven. At that hour, only the sketchiest ones are still open, often operating illegally. I grabbed my coat and keys but stopped short before leaving. Why not add a little joy to this walk? I rolled a small joint. It was 3 a.m. after all. Who would I be bothering? I lit it up as I stepped outside, braving the freezing cold breeze. Now, the area in which I live is pretty rough. Mostly foreign residents, many from Arabic countries. Poor integration has led to crime and violence being all too common. Even so, I was in good spirits as I strolled towards the flickering neon sign of the Spati. Just one more intersection to go. It was just me, walking alone, when I spotted a group of men standing at the corner. They looked Middle Eastern and a bit older than me. They watched. I walked by. It felt normal, nothing to worry about. I was already a little high, and I crossed the street without giving them much thought. Then I heard a voice call out, "Routine ID check. Show me your identification." My heart sank. Of course, this has to happen the one time I smoke in public. I turned to face the police. Only there weren't police. It was the group of the intersection, now slowly approaching me. "Routine ID check. Show me your ID. We're undercover," one of them said with a smug grin. I froze. The fact that they weren't cops became clear when, despite their demand, none of them reached for any identification of their own. "You know smoking that stuff's illegal, don't ya?" the man continued. His pupils were enormous. It was obvious these guys had no authority whatsoever. They began circling me. "Show us what's in your pockets." So it's a robbery, I thought. As long as I don't resist, maybe I'll only lose my phone and the few bills I brought for snacks. But that's when a wave of dread hit me. My weekly tips, about 300 euros in cash, were also in my pocket. I had forgotten to deposit it earlier. Losing that money would crush my tight budget for the month. What now? As I slowly reached into my pocket, the leader pressed me. "What's taking so long?" I pulled out an old pack of garments and broken headphones, hoping to satisfy them. "Where's your wallet? I need your ID." Still fumbling and too stubborn and stupid to hand over my tips, I inadvertently revealed something that shocked me even more. The hint of a Glock tucked into his belt. Knives and metal rods are typical weapons here, but a firearm? That was insane, even by local standards. German gun laws are incredibly strict. My adrenaline spiked. Slowly, I pulled out the €5 bill I'd planned to use for my snacks, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Where's your wallet?" he growled, his face darkening. My brain screamed at me to do something, anything, before this escalated further. Then, a desperate thought flashed through my mind. This gang in particular was known to have beef with the Russians. The frequent clashes between the two groups. Maybe, just maybe, I could use this. In a heavy Russian accent, I stammered, "My friends have my wallet. They come here soon, we meet." To my surprise, their poor English comprehension worked in my favor. They exchanged glances, muttering in German, and decided to wait. I forced myself to look confused, maintaining the bluff. It worked. Their effort to translate or figure me out must have seemed too much trouble. The leader finally pointed at my €5 bill. "All right then, you get us something to drink." Reluctantly, I followed them into the Spati. They grabbed a 6-pack of Coke and I paid heart pounding. I was certain this wasn't over, that they'd either search me themselves or retaliate when my non-existent friends didn't show. But then, just like that, they left. No violence, no further questions, nothing. I stood there in shock, unable to process what had just happened. Looking back, I can't believe I bluffed in such a dangerous situation. It could have been my last day on Earth, all over 300 euros. I learnt my lesson. These days I avoid walking around late at night when the streets are empty. Christmas Eve dinner at Burger King. It wasn't my first choice, but I had to work late, and given the time of night and the holiday, it seemed to be the best option available. I finished my shift at 9, and remembered I had some coupons which sealed my decision. The streets were empty, and silence hanged over them as I approached the restaurant. The lights inside were still on, but the dining room was locked up tight. My only option was drive-through, but I didn't have a car. I walked up to the speaker and tried to place my order, but the disembodied voice at the other end said, "Sir, we can't take walk-up orders through the drive-through." I pleaded, explaining I had no other way to get food, but the voice remained unmoved. Frustration grew inside me, and I said something I regret. Nothing crazy, but enough to vent my anger. And that's when I heard a voice behind me. "You can ride me if you want." I turned to see an older woman sitting in her car, watching me with an unsettlingly patient expression. She wore an outdated, slightly tattered winter coat, and her silver hair was pinned back neatly. Her smile was warm but unnervingly persistent. Her eyes gleamed under the phosphorescent streetlights. At first I declined. Something about it felt off, but she insisted, her voice syrupy and reassuring. "Oh, come now, dear. It's Christmas Eve. No sense in going hungry over a silly technicality." Maybe it was the hunger. Maybe it was the exhaustion, but against my better judgment I got into her car. I ordered my food and we waited. And waited. The minutes dragged on until I missed my bus, and I cursed under my breath, growing more annoyed by the second. The woman, watching me closely, offered me a ride home. I hesitated. The unease that had settled into my gut refused to leave. "No, that's okay, I'll just walk," I said, though the air outside was cold. She tilted her head slightly, her smile never wavering. "Oh, don't be silly. It's Christmas Eve. You shouldn't have to walk alone." I considered my options. I was a grown man, a 250-pound, 30-something-year-old guy. What harm could a woman in her 50s possibly do? So, reluctantly, I accepted. The first few minutes of the drive were fine. We made small talk, though something about her gaze in the rearview mirror sent a chill down my spine. 5 minutes from my house, she made a wrong turn. Actually, I live the other way," I said casually, glancing around the streets. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she kept driving, her fingers tightening on the steering wheel. "Hey, you missed the turn. You can just let me out here." Her voice now eerily calm. "Oh, sweetheart, I can't let you spend Christmas Eve alone. That wouldn't be right." The air in the car thickened. My pulse quickened. "Haha, I'm not alone. My dog's waiting for me." She glanced at me, her smile now stretching wider. "We have plenty of time. Why don't you come back to my place? I have some liqueur, some other fun things too. You like cocaine, right?" My stomach lurched. I hadn't touched drugs in years. But if she'd have asked me this 2 years ago when I was still lost in my addiction, would I have been able to say no? Would I have ended up where she was taking me, too unprepared to fight back? "Not interested. Turn the car around now." Her face darkened, the warmth draining from her expression. She gripped the wheel tighter, her knuckles white. "Oh, honey, it's already too late." She pressed the foot down on the gas, speeding through a stop sign. I could feel the car pulling me deeper into a direction I didn't recognize. The night outside was a black void, the empty roads stretching endlessly. My mind was racing. I knew I could overpower her, but what if someone was waiting at her house? What if she had a weapon, and what if I wasn't the first person she had done this to? Then I saw it. A car at a four-way stop ahead, another approaching from the opposite direction. She was forced to slow just for a second. It was now or never. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed the door handle, threw it open, and jumped out while the car was still rolling. I hit the pavement hard, pain lancing through my body, but I scrambled to my feet and ran. Behind me I heard the screech of tires. Then her voice, no longer warm and sweet, but desperate and commanding. "Wait, come back, it's okay. Just get into the car." I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I ran as fast as I could, my breath ragged and burning in my throat. The darkness swallowed me as I weaved through side streets, only stopping when I was sure I wasn't being followed. I made it home, locked my doors, and sat in silence, shaking. I never reported it. Would the cops even believe me? A grown man nearly abducted by an older woman. But the more I think about it, the more I wonder. How many others had she picked up before me? How many had been too trusting, too intoxicated, or too weak to fight back? And what would have happened to me if I hadn't have jumped out that car? I don't know who she was or what she wanted, but I know she wasn't taking me home, and that I wasn't the first. I only remember bits and pieces, but my mum and husband filled me in. This happened in 2018. My parents, my husband, and I were driving to Indianapolis to see some family. I had just found out about my husband's 4-month emotional affair with his unstable ex, and I was really struggling and felt extremely alone. His ex even had tried to break us up, and I was afraid she would succeed because of how manipulative she is. I lied and told my husband I was having a cigarette. Well, actually, I went to the bar, ordered 2 double vodkas with a splash of orange juice. I was really connecting with the bartender when she said they were closing. She gave me another bar that was nearby. I was already feeling pretty relaxed, so when I got to TGI Fridays, I ordered 2 more double vodkas, and I was wasted. So I went outside to have a cigarette to wake me up. I was leaning against a light pole in the parking lot. Time passed, and suddenly I realized I was being walked and pushed into a car. Suddenly I heard my mum yelling to stop, that I was her daughter. This creepy man was challenging her on whether or not we were related. It was insane, and I don't remember much, but I do remember him trying to steal me. This guy would not give up and was basically holding me hostage. That's when my mum said she'd call the police. He drove away so fast with his passenger door still open. My mother and husband told me later that they tracked my phone and came to where I was. I had my phone in my purse, so I don't know if the guy got rid of it or whatever, but it's scary. They found my phone discarded. Then my mum called 911 because I was extremely drunk and not making sense. I woke up in the hospital. I was tied down because apparently I needed it for my own safety. When I actually woke up, I had a huge bruise on my arm from the guy trying to get me in his car, and an incredibly big bruise on my chest. I don't even know what happened, but felt guilty and never really understood what happened. But it's definitely one of the more creepy things that's happened to me in my life. Moral of the story: if you're out alone at night, be very careful, and if you're going to be inebriated, be in a group. There is safety in numbers after all. This happened about a year ago when I was 22. While I wouldn't call myself a head-turner, I have the kind of face that makes me look much younger than I really am. With makeup, I can barely pass for legal, and without it, I kind of look like a kid. And that attracts the wrong kind of attention. Men who hover at the edge of decency, their gaze is lingering too long, their intentions suffocatingly filthy. It was around 9 p.m., and I got my usual bus, sliding into a seat near the back. At the next stop, as habit dictated, I glanced around, checking for elderly passengers or anyone who needed a seat more than me. That's when I noticed him. At first glance, he was utterly forgettable. Plain, average clothes. His clothes were casual but neat, his build hovering between lean and slim. A fresh buzz cut sat atop his head, and I wondered if it was to hide the slow creep of baldness. But what rooted me in place were his eyes. He was staring. Not in that passive, mindless way people do when they're lost in thought. No. This was different. His stare was unwavering, razor-sharp, dissecting me with an intensity that made my stomach knot. My breath hitched, but I forced myself to look away, pressing my forehead against the cold window, trying to rationalize it. Perhaps he was exhausted from a long day, and his gaze was vacant, unfocused. Maybe he was looking past me. Maybe not at all. But deep down I knew better. There was nothing vacant about his expression. It was controlled, purposeful, predatory. I flicked my eyes back just for a second to confirm what I already knew. He was still staring, and his eyes were locked on me. The bus rattled on, stop after stop, and though passengers trickled out, he remained. Worse, he moved closer, 2 rows ahead of me now. He turned sideways so he had a perfect view of both me and the exit doors. My pulse pounded in my ears. I considered getting off early, but that would be a mistake. If he followed, I would be alone and vulnerable. I forced my face into a blank, unreadable mask, pretending not to notice. But I was keenly aware of every breath, every twitch of his fingers, every slight movement of his body. Then my stop. My plan was simple. Wait until the very last second before getting off, hoping to throw him off. I stood, glanced outside, and hesitated. In the reflection of the glass, I saw his body tense. The moment the last passenger stepped on, I moved quickly and efficiently. My feet barely hit the pavement before I heard him behind me. There was no doubt he was following. Panic clawed at my chest, but I forced it down. My house was only 300 meters away, but I couldn't go straight there. I wouldn't let him know where I lived. My street was dark, empty and isolated. If he followed me there, I'd disappear into the shadows and no one would hear me scream. The crossroad ahead was my only chance. The traffic light followed a pattern. When the left side cars got a red, the right side ones had a green for another 15 seconds. A gap. A window. If he wasn't local, he wouldn't know about it. I kept walking, kept the 2-meter gap between us constant, pretending I didn't notice the human shadow stalking me. The moment the next car approached from the right, far enough to make it across, but close enough to cut off a follower, I bolted. My heart thundered as I sprinted across the road. From the corner of my eye, I saw him step forward, then hesitate. The car was too close. He backed up. But I wasn't safe yet. A bus was pulling into the stop at the base of my street, and I used the shifting crowd to vanish. Weaving between taller bodies, I ducked and maneuvered, never slowing and never looking back. My street loomed ahead, dark, silent, and too exposed. Instead of running straight home, I dropped down between 2 parked cars, barely daring to breathe. My pulse roared in my ears as I peered through the window of one of them, watching. He appeared at the corner. I saw his chest rise and fall, saw his head swivel as he scanned my street. He was looking for me, straining against the darkness, searching. I held my breath. If he turned his head just right, if he leaned down just slightly, he would see me. His presence was suffocating me, and I wanted to scream, but I stayed rooted in place, paralyzed by pure, undiluted terror. Then after what felt like an eternity, he turned away. He chose the wrong direction. He walked straight up the road instead of turning onto mine. I waited and waited, afraid to move, afraid he'd double back, afraid this nightmare wasn't over yet. But he didn't. When I finally gathered the courage, I ran home faster than I ever had in my life. I locked every door, every window, and my hands shook as I fumbled with the deadbolt. My dad was home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, lurking in the night. And I truly hope I never see him again. A few years ago, I had a terrifying experience that still haunts me to this day. I was a 35-year-old man at the time, and living in a busy city. I had just finished a late shift at work, and it was around 10. And I was walking home through the quieter side streets of my neighborhood. I'm someone who's always been somewhat cautious, so I was alert, keeping an eye out for any unusual activity. As I walked down the street, I noticed a guy about 20 feet behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. He seemed like any other person walking the same route, but something about his movements caught my attention. He wasn't walking in a normal manner. He was clearly trying to keep his distance, but his pace matched mine, no matter how fast or slow I went. After a few blocks, I decided to take a detour. I turned onto a side street that was a little less populated, hoping he wouldn't follow. I checked over my shoulder, and sure enough, he was still there. It's hard to describe, but I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My instincts told me something wasn't right. I crossed the street, hoping that it would throw him off, but he crossed too without hesitation. I thought, okay, this is weird now. I had to make a decision. I wasn't that far from home, but something about this guy's persistence made me uncomfortable. I decided to stop at a nearby 24/7 convenience store in an attempt to lose him. The store was empty save for the cashier, who barely looked up from their phone. I quickly grabbed a drink and stood by the door, hoping to see if the guy would pass by, but he didn't. He stopped right outside the store. At this point, I could see his face clearly through the glass. He was staring directly at me. I panicked and ran back into the aisles, trying to calm down. I could hear his footsteps growing louder as he approached the door. I couldn't stay here any longer. I tried to pay, but I was so rattled I couldn't focus on anything. The cashier just stared at me, probably wondering why I looked so frantic. I threw the drink on the counter, paid quickly, and bolted out the door. I ran down another street, not wanting to look back, but knowing I had to. I didn't see him for a while, and my heart slowly started to calm down. But as I turned the corner to my street, I saw him again, standing at the far end of the block. It was like he'd been waiting there the whole time. I wasn't sure what to do next. I considered calling the police, but he hadn't really done anything illegal, just followed me for a while. I didn't want to overreact, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a coincidence. He was still standing there watching me, and now he was closer. I took a deep breath, checked both ways, and made a beeline for my apartment building, and didn't dare to look back until I was inside. When I got to my apartment, I locked the door and stayed there, staring out the window for what felt like hours. I didn't see him again after that night, but the whole experience left me unsettled for weeks. I never felt comfortable walking home alone late at night after that, even though I've lived in the city my entire life. I still wonder if I was just being paranoid, but there was something off about the way he followed me. It felt intentional, and left me with a gut feeling I couldn't shake. What do you think? Overreaction? Or a narrow miss from something sinister? About 7 years ago, when I was 20, I was balancing the challenges of college life while trying to earn some extra money. In my search for work, I accepted a job as a living caregiver for a 98-year-old woman called Lillian. She had Alzheimer's, and although I had no formal training in caregiving, I was determined to do my best. I spent hours researching the condition, learning techniques to ease her anxiety and confusion, and striving to make her days as comfortable and familiar as possible. Despite my best efforts, the job was emotionally demanding, and frustration occasionally crept in. One particular night remains etched in my memory. It was a sweltering summer night, probably around 2 a.m., when I was abruptly awoken by Lillian's frantic screams. My heart raced as I hurried to her bedroom, where I found her sitting helplessly in her laundry basket, tears streaming down her face. She had mistaken the basket for the toilet, and after sitting down, found herself unable to get up. The look of confusion and embarrassment in her eyes was heartbreaking. Gently, I helped her to her feet, reassured her that everything was okay, and guided her to the bathroom to get cleaned up. As she clung to me, I could feel her vulnerability, and it made me even more determined to be there for her. After settling Lillian back into bed, I started a load of laundry and decided to step outside for a quick cigarette to calm my nerves. I felt guilty for needing a break, but I also needed a moment to breathe. I sat in my car, turned on the air conditioning, and called my best friend to vent about the night. The dark, empty street was eerily quiet, and although it was the middle of summer, the oppressive heat seemed to carry a strange tension. As I spoke with my friend, I felt a sudden wave of unease wash over me. An instinctive alarm rang in my mind, telling me to look over my left shoulder. When I did, I saw a young man, probably in his late teens or early 20s, walking down the side towards my car. He wore a hooded sweatshirt with the hood pulled up, an unusual choice given the warmth of the night. My gut instinct told me something was wrong. My pulse quickened and the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I knew I should lock my doors, but an irrational fear of appealing judgment held me back. I didn't want the man to think I was labeling him as a threat just because he was walking alone at night. My mind wrestled with my instincts, leaving me frozen in indecision. My friend was still talking, but her voice became distant and muffled as the sense of dread intensified. Suddenly, her voice broke through the mental fog. "Hey, why aren't you answering me? What's going on?" She was panicked, her tone urgent, and it jolted me back to reality as I turned my head to the right. That's when I saw the man lunging towards my passenger door. He was gripping the handle, yanking it so violently that my car rocked with each pull. His other hand was jammed into the pocket of his sweatshirt, and I couldn't shake the fear that he might be holding a weapon. Without thinking, I slammed my left hand onto the lock button as he tugged the handle again. The sharp click of the lock seemed deafening in the silence of the night. Our eyes met through the window. His gaze was cold, angry, and devoid of emotion. My body remained rigid with terror. I couldn't scream, couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. I sat there gripping my phone, listening to my friend frantically call my name. The man's eyes stayed locked on mine for what felt like an eternity. And then as abruptly as it began, he let go, stood still for a fleeting moment, and turned away, sprinting into the shadow and vanishing into the night. My entire body collapsed into sobs as the adrenaline surged through me. My friend was crying too, desperately asking if I was okay. I called 911, hands trembling so violently that I nearly dropped the phone. The dispatcher asked if I could leave the area, but that wasn't an option. Lillian was inside sleeping peacefully, unaware of the danger that had just unfolded outside. The thought of leaving her alone was unimaginable. I took a deep breath, summoned every ounce of courage I had, and dashed back into the house. Once inside, I locked the door behind me and checked every window and entry point, making sure everything was secure. I tiptoed into Lillian's room and found her resting peacefully, her soft snores a reassuring sound in the oppressive silence. I sat in the living room, heart still racing, and waited for the police. Here, incidents like this aren't uncommon, and the police, understandably stretched thin, didn't arrive for nearly 4 hours. By then the man was long gone, leaving behind only my fear and unanswered questions. What had he wanted? Was he planning to hurt me, steal the car? And why did he suddenly flee? To this day I think about that night more often than I'd like to admit. The what-ifs still haunt me. What if I'd have left the car unlocked? What if he hadn't run away? What if I'd ignored my intuition entirely? What if he would have pulled out whatever he was hiding and started beating the car and then me with it? I don't know what made him stop and flee, but I'm endlessly grateful that he did. Trust your instincts, without hesitation and without guilt, and without worrying about someone else thinking badly of you for choosing your safety first. It could save your life. I don't know if it saved mine that night, but it very well could have. This happened many years ago when I worked on the 14th floor of an office building in San Francisco, where the cold night air seeped through the walls and the faint hum of distant traffic echoed like a ghostly whisper. I started work at 8 p.m., long after the building had emptied for the night. The front doors were locked, and the security guard who usually patrolled the lobby didn't start his rounds until 8:30. so I used my fob to get in, and stepped into the dimly lit first floor, which was nothing but a cavernous lobby and 6 silent elevators. Immediately I noticed someone standing there, motionless right in front of the elevators. His shoulders were hunched, and his head tilted slightly forward as though listening for something. The oversized jacket hung loosely on his thin frame, and his boots were scuffed and caked with dried mud. He didn't acknowledge me. He just stood there fixated on the closed doors of elevator 6, the farthest one from the entrance. The atmosphere was thick with unease. I was usually the only person in the building at that hour. Occasionally my co-worker, who would also work late, arrived around the same time, but typically I rode the elevator alone. I pressed the up button and waited. As I did, I heard the man whispering to himself, his voice a low, indecipherable murmur. He stole a quick glance at me, then turned back to the elevator. My pulse quickened. The building required a special code to access the floors after hours. Each floor had its own sequence. Mine was 141414. Only elevator 1 reached floors 11 through 14. The others stopped at 10. Elevator 6 opened with a metallic groan that echoed through the empty lobby, making the silence feel even more oppressive. The man stepped in without hesitation. I stayed behind, waiting for elevator 1, and feeling a fleeting sense of relief as the elevator doors closed behind him. But then I noticed something strange. The elevator didn't start moving. He hadn't entered the code. He didn't belong here. Panic surged through me. Elevator 1 finally arrived and I rushed in, frantically punching in my code. The doors then began to close when at the last second, a hand shot through the gap, forcing them open again, and the man slid inside. He didn't look at me at first, just pressed the button for the 5th floor, which didn't light up. The elevator continued ascending past the 5th floor without stopping. His breathing grew erratic. He rocked back and forth, whispering softly while his right hand fumbled inside his jacket. The air was suffocating. I edged myself into the corner with my back pressed against the cold steel. The elevator reached the 14th floor. The doors opened with a chime that sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. I bolted. My office had the entire floor, but the entrance was secured by a glass door that required a key. I reached it and jammed the key into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. Through the glass, I saw a co-worker at his desk, his eyes wide with alarm as he dropped his glass, the glass shattering on the floor, and leapt to his feet in confusion and fear. His face pale as he registered my panic. Behind him, the man's footsteps broke into a sprint. I risked a glance back and saw him hurtling towards me, mouth twisted into a snarl, eyes wild and unhinged. He let out a guttural, animalistic growl as he closed the distance between us. The lock finally clicked. I yanked the door open, dove through, and slammed it shut just as the man collided with the glass. The impact shuddered through the floor. He stood there inches from us, panting and baring his teeth like a feral creature. His eyes never left mine as he licked the glass, leaving smeared streaks of saliva while he whispered something unintelligible. We called 911. The minutes dragged as we watched him pace and run, occasionally slamming his fists against the glass, his breath fogging the surface. Within 20 minutes the police were there. It took 3 officers, but they subdued him. When he was searched, they found in his jacket pocket a large hunting knife. I'm dubious as to what he wanted and what he was doing. Part of me doesn't want to find out. Who was he targeting on the 5th floor? Perhaps some questions are best left unanswered. This happened when I was 17, right before I turned 18. I was in a lot of apps to help make friends. I'm autistic and struggle making friends in real life. On the apps I had stated things like my interests and my sexuality. Then I met this one guy who lived an hour away, and I was looking for a friend to smoke with, and he said he would. I know, I was naive. Nonetheless, we planned a time, and I waited outside for him. He brought me a breeze, and we took turns hitting his cart. We had a very meaningful, deep conversation. We immediately just seemed to click, which I thought was amazing. Until, a bit later, when I was very high and impulsive. I don't really know my limits well. It was getting very cold, and I told him I should get back inside. He agreed and started to walk me towards my window. I was stumbling, unable to see straight, and once in my driveway he asked me for a hug before he left. And, me thinking it was kinda cute, I did give him a hug. Then the next thing I know, he was behind me. He had a knife to my neck. At first I tried to fight back, but realized it was getting me nowhere. Fighting back even severely hurt me. In the heat of the moment, I thought I was going to become just another true crime murder story, so I started listening to him. I was hoping he'd spare my life, but at the same time was trying to leave as much evidence as possible, in case listening didn't get me out of it. Then, I saw scars on his thighs. I managed to appeal to some sort of humanity he had in him. My exact words were, "I saw your scars just like me. You're hurting. But this isn't going to stop. It's only going to soothe it temporarily." I don't know how I was able to think so logically in such a panicked state, but it ended up being what saved me. He ended up letting go of me, only if we agreed to meet again. So I did. Then went inside and tended to my cut thumb. I blocked him on everything and kept his chats on my phone just in case I was ever brave enough to go to the police. Obviously, we didn't meet up again, and never shall, but what scares me most is how much we had in common with our mentality and personality. It's scary. I know predators like this say stuff all the time that they don't mean, but our deep conversations felt real. Don't meet anyone online you just met. It's a really bad idea, especially when you're alone at night. Who knows? I might have nearly become a statistic after all. Be careful out there. I went to see the New York Rangers hockey team play at Madison Square Garden, and I traveled alone. I went alone because I don't have that many friends, and no one knew I was a fan of the Rangers. It's whatever though. Overall, I had a great time. The Rangers won, and I was talking to some other Rangers fans who were sitting right next to me. When the game finished, it was dark. I exited the arena along with a big crowd, and we all were singing the melody to the song Seven Nation Army. I then separated from the crowd and went on my own. I was on my way back to the parking lot that was about 6 or 7 blocks away from where MSG was. I had to park far away because there were so many vehicles on 34th Street that there would be a lot of traffic, and all the parking lots were full. I would say it took around 10 minutes to reach where I parked my car. It was quiet all around. I couldn't hear a single other person in the darkness. As I was walking to my car, I felt a towel being wrapped around my head. Next thing I know, I was thrown to the ground and I felt 4 pairs of feet at least kicking me. They were mostly kicking me in the head and in my stomach. This went on for a good 15 seconds. When they finished, I was too weak to move or say anything. I then felt my phone, wallet, and car keys being taken out of my pockets. I wasn't overthinking at that moment. I was being robbed. After it was done, I heard a bunch of men speaking Spanish to each other and heard them run off. I could tell they were Venezuelan because of their accents, and heard them run until their footfalls could no longer be heard. That's when I felt that it was safe to get up off the ground. It was really hard to stand. I kept grunting and groaning because of the pain. It took me a full minute to stand, but I couldn't even do it straight. Then I took a step and my back was hunched over. I was walking like I had Parkinson's. I walked 50 feet and saw a payphone. When I was there, I dialed 911 and told them I just got robbed, and everything I had in my pocket, which included my phone, keys, and wallet, were gone. After I told them every detail, they said that police officers would be right over. They came in about 2 minutes, which was surprisingly hasty. 2 officers came out from the police car and asked me if I was okay. I told them I was fine mentally, but not physically. I was put inside the car and they took me to the hospital. I told them more about what happened in the car. I arrived at the hospital in under 5 minutes, and I didn't need that much treatment. All I got was some ice packs and some painkiller shots. I saw that there were new charges on my credit cards which disturbed me to my core and had to cancel my cards. But what's more important than this is that I made it out alive and can hopefully move past this. I was driving home very late at night on the highway after a short vacation. It was Sunday night and I had slept very little during the day, and for one reason or another, I had to be back at work on Monday morning. So I pushed through, thinking I'll just get home and rest properly. The road was completely clear, and at the time I hadn't seen a car in like half an hour on any of the 4 lanes. I remember thinking to myself, I'm almost home. I've got to keep pushing. At some point I remember thinking, halfway jokingly, man, it's eerie out here being the only car on the road. What if I see a huge truck right in front of me and crash into it towards my death? Maybe 5 minutes after finishing that thought, I saw the back of a huge truck, complete with lights and its brake lights on. Pushed the brakes as hard as I could, thinking that there was no way I would be stopping before I hit that truck. Wheels screeched as the car came to a complete halt, and there was no one in sight. I had still been completely alone on the road. Your brain can absolutely make you see things that aren't there. Then, I learnt about driving tired, and how it can lead to micro-sleeping with your eyes open, even if you think you're fully in control. Find a safe spot and nap for like 15 minutes. It's better to drive awake than tired, because you might never arrive. Take it from me. Driving exhausted can mess with your perception of reality. Be careful out there on the road. In my town, there's a story that a guy has moved into the deep woods close to our town. I never believed it, as I go for night drives occasionally and never saw anything resembling a man living in the woods. Anyway, tonight I decided to go for a drive and drove past a pizza place. Being hungry, I decided to get a pizza for myself before I went home. In my head, I had a plan to eat pizza and play some Minecraft, because I'm in my 2-week Minecraft phase at the moment. I paid for my pizza and started walking to my car, pizza in one hand and phone in the other, messaging my friend if he wanted to play some Minecraft when I got home. I look up from my phone to cross the road to the car park when I see something underneath my car. It looks like a shadow or something dark. I slipped my phone in my pocket and pulled out my keys. I unlocked the car to scare off anything near it. I was thinking maybe it was a cat or a dog just hanging around underneath. But when I unlock the car, nothing happens. No cat runs away, no dog fleeing, nothing. The shadow looked like it was cast from the driver's side, so I was going to have to look at whatever this thing was. I put my keys away, pulled my phone out again and turned the flashlight to see better in the dark. As I turned towards the driver's side, I see him. A dirty, naked man with big eyes staring right at me. He was crouched down trying to hide. Now I don't usually get scared of anything, but this guy frightened me. He looked like he rolled around in mud and dried it out on his skin. His eyes looked creepy, bloodshot, almost bulging from his head. And as I said at the start, he was completely naked. I get startled and jump backwards and out of instinct dropped my pizza. It falls out of the box and onto the floor. I start moving back slowly and shout to him to get away from the car. He looks up at me, then at the pizza, and then back at me again. He tilts his head to one side and then jumps towards the pizza like a dog, grabs it, and starts running away down the road. I assume he ran all the way to the woods. I wouldn't know where he went as I didn't feel like following him. I lock my car and run to the pizza place and stay there for a bit. The workers obviously don't believe me when I tell them what happened, but I know what I saw. Once the fear subsides after a while, I realize the guy just stole my pizza. Angry as I was looking forward to it, I get another one and run to my car this time. I get in, put the pizza on the passenger seat and go home. Once I got home, I locked all my doors and windows, even my bedroom door, as I was still feeling quite shaken. I think I'll be playing Minecraft until the sun comes up. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I do hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. If of course you did, you can let me know down below. It does go a long way. Huge extra thanks to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen for their continued support of the channel. And if you'd like some cool extras, you can find out what they are in the description. But that's it from me. Until next time, stay awesome and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.